Still a little closed, but they give you a really nice Python, the sysdb. They make it really usable from a sysadmin perspective, right? And so now you will see Chef and Puppet running on Arista switches as well. And now Cumulus actually is a whole nother kind of move the ball forward in that they're actually just selling you an operating system. You will go out and get your own hardware, right? And this is real interesting because if you look at the founder of Cumulus, he was actually a Cisco guy that went to work for Google and had this kind of aha moment that, holy crap, Google doesn't buy vendor-based switches. They buy their own equipment, and and they have this kind of their own little kind of software space for it. And so we started a company called Cumulus where you can offer the software and you get your switches, right? And so if we think about, and later on I'll talk about what we learned in DevOps, right? What happened with servers a while back, right? What we had with the server space is we bought things from IBM, we got AIX, we got HP, and we got Sun Solaris, and it was really coupled, right? Sound affiliated switches. Right, but at some point we got a little wiser and said, screw that, we can buy our own hardware. And the big guys did it first. They bought hardware in bulk, and then they run, and then they, you look at what Google does with their shipping containers and now supposedly boats that will actually run computers. The point is that we're kind of following, the network space is following that same path. Now, I've had a great debate with funds, over the last few days, like is the Cumulus and this little hype, and it may be because the truth of the matter is unless you're Google, Facebook, or Microsoft, you probably can't buy this equipment at the bulk and the price that isn't too far off from Arista. They do everything. So I don't know. From an industry standpoint, I think Cumulus is very interesting in that it's breaking down kind of silos of technology and offering us to be more creative. And I think this is the slide I was at, is this Rob Sherwood character says that, isn't it pretty freaking interesting that you can go out and Google switch hardware and get the price for it, right? That, and even that price, like, it's funny, that price is like, people say, like, I can get that for $5K, why $8K? I'm like, well, wait a minute. I live in Ackworth, which is nowhere, Georgia, which is 5 miles from a place that's a little better than nowhere called Kennesaw, and that was what told me the 5-mile place I could get this switch from for $8K, right? So the point being is this is a disruptive thing. That fact that I can actually go out and think about buying my own hardware and putting my own software and not be coupled by some vendors. And then, another quick one is the night before I was doing the DevOps Day presentation last week, somebody sent me a link to this, which is this Intel. And, a gentleman I'm going to talk about later, Brent Salisbury, and I'll have a link I think is somebody you should follow if this presentation seems interesting. His quote is, alternatives to Broadcom will be healthy, right? So my joke was, when he said that to me, I said, dude, let's put Debian on it and Open Daylight and let's go. But it's quite interesting what's going on. So in summary on this SDN situation, right, what's going on? A lot of software-based opportunity here, right? The plate tectonics, they're changing. The networks are becoming more open, right? And we're forcing this openness, you could say Juniper forces Arista. Cumulus forces Arista to act differently. The fact that people can Google bare metal switches forces openness, right? So and clearly network virtualization, and then the cloud itself, right? The cloud is basically, oh, wait a minute, I've got this whole thing that's virtual here. Why do I want to? I can keep playing the virtual game, right? And now things get really interested. Specifically, we start talking about network functions virtualization, where all those components are virtual. So I can start building my kind of workflow of what I need, right? So second section of this presentation is DevOps lessons learned. So I think there are things happen in decades, right? So if you look at the 1990s, we had really object-oriented programming and Agile being the decade of kind of code, Java, C++, right? It was a very software development decade, right? And we made some, love it or hate it, we've made some incredible strides in our industry in the way we approach software and the things we were able to do. In the year 2000, or the decade of the 2000, it was about compute, really, right? It kind of started with consolidation of data centers with virtualization. Linux really kicked in, right? Like the idea of this kind of separation. People were starting not to just buy AIX boxes. They were buying Red Hat and buying their own boxes, right? Or Canonicals, Ubuntu, right? So this whole decade. And then later in the decade, things got really interested by some people. Mark, are you here? He's not here yet. He'll be here tomorrow. Mark Burgess will be here tomorrow. He was the inventor of CF Engine. Now, he figured this out 20 years ago, this abstraction of infrastructure, called it CF Engine, but he worked in a university. It was all academic to him at the time, and a gentleman named Luke Knies, the founder of Puppet Labs, really thought, well, I want to commercialize, or I want to make this a consumable. So he wrote this thing called Puppet, 2005, 2006. That's when I kind of got involved in this game. And I got to meet Luke and really fell in love with what he was doing. In fact, I did a lot of Tivoli stuff, which was kind of first generation configuration management stuff. And I was on OSCON, and so it's kind of funny. Somebody was there and they said, "Hey, you want to go see this thing called Puppet?" And I'm like, "What does it do?" And they're like, "It's a monitoring tool." I'm like, "Yeah, let's go," And it's obviously not a monitoring tool. It's a configuration manager. And I see Luke and I'm thinking, what is this young kid going to tell me about? I just spent the last 5 years at JP Morgan Chase and Aetna and doing configuration management at large scale infrastructure. This little open source young kid, I'm going to smack him around. 5 minutes into it, I'm in the front row. I got my book out and I'm taking every note I can possibly take. Because I realized, my God, he's invented, and it wasn't him, it was actually Mark Burgess, but Luke pushed the ball of this infrastructure as code, right? So where we started abstracting what we did in infrastructure, and then we can actually then turn that into control, source control, which leads to testing, which is now we're in the 8 billion deploys a day cycle, right? And then, so I think right now in 2010, we're in this networking cycle. Right? Like, what is the network going to look like, right? In things like in 2012, Nicira being bought for 1.2 billion or 1.3, give or take a point on a billion. The point is, there's something serious here, right? There's the fact for VMware to pay that much attention to what those guys did out at Stanford, right? So how did we win the war in? When we went to DevOps, right? So, after Luke Knies had worked on Puppet for a while, another really good friend of mine, Adam Jacob, had these ideas about moving and changing what Luke and Mark had done for a different reason and a different rationale and a different philosophy, right? And so he wrote this thing called Chef, right? And he drove the ball. I got to meet Adam real early in this game. And we just kind of fell in love with each other, and from a technology standpoint. And I went to work there. I was like the 9th person in ops code. And I'm typically, in America we call ourselves evangelists, which means we promote technology. We try to get people excited about ideas that improve their life, really. And I feel proud for the year and a half that I spent at ops code, because I think I did go around improving people's lives. And how did we have that conversation? We went to people and we said, hey, dude, I think there's a better way of what you're doing. And there's some techniques you can use, like abstraction and source control and all these things. And it was a battle. I mean, early on, we think now like, oh, Chef, everybody uses Chef. Everybody uses Puppet. Oh, easy peasy, right? But 5 years ago, I mean, the people you'd go to, the old school sysadmins, they basically would be like, you'd meet Bob. Bob's my classic sysadmin guy, right? You got Bob's directories, Bob's scripts. God forbid you make Bob mad, right? And if you're a junior guy, oh my God, don't go near Bob. Don't ask him that question. Oh, and I would say if Bob dies, what happens? We're all screwed, right? And then we those early days, it was like, hey, you know what? I got this do it 5 script. Leave me alone. I do SSH, I parallel out. I don't need your fancy new automobile, right? We got horse and buggies, and we're doing fine here. And then, ultimately, the guys that were a little in tune, like you get through to them, and you get to see that glimmer of hope, and they'd be like, yeah, John, I get it. It sounds really good, but I don't know if I can trust that thing. That thing going around and doing all this crazy stuff. Oh, my goodness. And oh, by the way, that thing doing around is a lot better than you, like cutting and pasting spreadsheets. But, and then, there was I love oh, John, you're dead on with this. And for everybody else in the world, this thing would be awesome. But you don't understand our application. It's just a little different. And then, you can see this kind of reverse pyramid happening here. Then there's the same thing. I get it. But in our world, you can never, ever, ever. I had a guy one time at a large telco in Europe tell me, John, this is great, but for a core service, you can never, ever. And he went on like 10 minutes, whatever. And I said, okay, you done? He said, yeah. I said, well, here's the deal. That's never, ever, 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 ever going to happen. You know what I mean? In other words, things break. Like, I think we get this as if you're not a guy that gets that anti-fragility or that, that like dealing and living with failure and embracing failure is a core part of DevOps, right? It's a ridiculous statement to tell somebody that you have a service that can never, ever, ever break. And then ultimately, right, all the rest, I was going to try not to curse. I think I cursed once. Now I'm going to curse twice. So somebody let me know what my curse-o-meter is. But all that's bullshit, right? Because the bottom line is, it was fear of their job. It was fear of control, right? That's ultimately what it was, right? You can make all the excuses, and the bottom line is you had to flip that. You had to change the mentality that, no, you're going to, we used to call it 80-20 flop, right? Like, you'd get somebody to admit, you wouldn't tell them, you would get them to admit that 80% of their job and what they did was muck, waste of time, just baloney. I mean, and that 20%, maybe glimmer was, yeah, I got an attaboy, or it's business adding value. And the promise that we tried to deliver with things, well, for me personally with Chef, was I think I can change that to be 80% business value and 20% muck, right? And I think for the most part, the people who have succeeded are there, right? So, but what finally got the masses to listen? Why now does GE, General Electric, stand up and say that using infrastructure code is transformational for General Electric, right? Like, what caused that? Like, I'm like, where were you guys 5 years ago, But I think it was that commodity infrastructure. We went to an idea that we were going to throw away these servers every 3 years. Linux clearly had, changing from kind of HP, IBM, and Sun to, Red Hat, Canonical with whatever hardware I wanted. And then ultimately, the real driving force that forced people to change their habits, like from Bob scripts to, maybe I ought to look at abstraction and source control and test, was cloud infrastructure. And I say that applications prior to cloud were primarily north and south, right? They didn't move around a lot. They stuck them in a place. They worked. Everything was great. Now all of a sudden they started going east and west. You had auto scaling. More importantly, you had fast provisioning times. Generously, I would say if it took 6 days to get from dock to rack and 2 days to build the server, like that, that was the old school. So in that 2 days, if you played golf, oh no, right? Big deal, right? But now all of a sudden that 6 days from dock to rack becomes 6 minutes. You ain't playing golf. And even that 1 day sucks, right? Going out and looking at the checklist, oh, apt-get install, oh, forgot to do apt-get upstate, right? Right? Like that didn't get it either. My virtual rack to delivery need to be in minutes, right? So abstraction becomes really important in there. And so the last section is, what could the new world look like? What have we learned over the last 5 years, maybe longer, maybe shorter, that could apply to this network world? So I got this bug about midsummer. I'm always looking for the next adventure, right? My company got acquired. I'm not saying I'm leaving, guys, but my company got acquired. And the thing is I ran into a bunch of network guys. In fact, this one guy, Brent Salisbury, I was on a bus ride from Denver to Vail. We were going to a conference, and I see this young kid, and he's basically got IntelliJ open. He's writing Java code, but he's got some Python code on the side. I kind of can see a view of his console. He's running Maven and all this stuff, and he's doing builds. And I'm like, "Are you a developer?" He's like, "No, I'm a network engineer." I'm like, "Oh, really? That's really interesting." And we start talking, and I'm like, "Holy crap!" And he's talking about, "Yeah, I'm trying to integrate Jenkins. I'm building this." I'll talk about something he uses called Mininet. Turns out he's a committer on Open Daylight, and I'm like, "Holy crap! Like this is the way everybody else needs to look like, right? And so you'll see actually a lot of slides in here come from his blog, Network Static. And he has this slide here is like still being used in 15 years, right? The network is north and south. And some data points back in the early days of what we were trying to do in DevOps and abstraction and all that stuff. It wasn't uncommon to talk to somebody and have them admit that their sysadmin server ratios were somewhere in the neighborhood of one sysadmin to like 100 servers, right? That's people who weren't using abstractions and using kind of old school infrastructure. And it was clear that a lot of those people would admit to you that 80% of their time was really just inertia and just things that really didn't matter. And so I saw a keynote a few weeks ago at an open networking user group in New York where the keynote speaker said that from his survey in 2013, network sysadmins to switch ratios are 1 to 120. And my heart's like, yeah, like this is a great opportunity here. And the next sentence, he said three things. He said we need DevOps and networks. He said our server ratios are our switch ratios are 1 to 120. And then he basically said most network engineers spend 80% of the time, not in his words, my words, the muck, right? And okay, I had this mission in the summer, like, okay, I'm going to talk to anybody who's willing to talk to me about network engineering. And let me just see. And it was like, oh my God, I know what I'm doing is right because it was not Bob now, it was Bill. And it was Bill's scripts. And instead of being Perl, it was TCL, Tickle, right? Oh, and it was expect scripts, which, by the way, some of those guys in the sysadmin were pretty married to that too. And John, I don't trust this thing, right? And then, oh yeah, that makes all the sense in the world what you're talking about, John, but you don't really understand my network, right? And then, you can never, ever, ever break my network, right? And so I was reading this article recently where this guy was so arrogant that he basically said that, you know what, if you lose a server, big deal. You lose a top-of-the-rack switch, whoa. I'm like, I want to reach through my terminal, grab you by the throat and say, welcome to Night Capital. Anybody know what Night Capital is? It's a company that went out of business in 24 hours. 100-year-old company, second-ranked exchange, financial exchange company, high-frequency trading company, went out of business in 24 hours. If you want to read an awesome blog article, John Osbar has a review of the SEC filing of a Night Capital outage. Basically, they made a mistake in software for a server that put them out of business in 24 hours. So don't tell me that your goddamn, I wasn't going to curse, don't tell me your fucking network is more important than the server. They're all important. And then, guess what? At the end of the day, they're afraid to lose their job and their control, right? So very similar. I had this, Brent Salisbury's been a mentor to me, and he's really helped me understand. He loves the idea that I'm passionate about DevOps, so we've kind of created a good kinship. And I said the other day, somebody was talking about, oh my God, don't let those two be in a room together, it'd be insane. And Vanessa Alvarez said, and I said, 5 years ago I wanted all sysadmins to be like Adam Jacob, which is the founder of Opscode, and in 5 years from now I want all sysadmins to be like Brent Salisbury. And so these are a couple of guys that have been helping me understand some stuff. Brent, he's Network Static on Twitter. I mean, if you want to see what a bleeding edge guy looks like, he's on the Open Daylight, pretty awesome. Jerry Schulman wrote, one thing about Brent, he's everything that you want out of a new engineer that we want. If you asked Adam Jacob 4 years ago, what does every sysadmin need to look like? He said polyglot. They need to code. They need to code multiple languages. Sorry, guys. That's tough. That's the way it's going to have to be. If you don't like it, tough. Well, I think it's the same story here, right? Sorry, guys. And so, Brent is your classic. He's got 3 or 4 languages on the belt. He pretty much always has an IDE open on his screen. And then Jerry Schulman is pretty awesome. Well, I mean, he's the guy I told you about earlier. He wrote the Netdev Ruby gem for Juno OS, right? And then I like this Rob Sherwood. He gives these great presentations about bare metal switches, and he ran a workshop, this thing where we built a bare metal switch from scratch, which was really cool. And then at least I not forget my new friends, the Cup Fighter dudes, right? this is an interesting company. In fact, I'm going to go as far as saying that these guys, might be the Etsy of Europe, right? So, and they've been tremendously helpful over the last few days. Funds, Hugo, and a bunch of other people just help me understand how they see SDN. Because I've been actually attacking it from an OpenStack perspective, because that was easy for me to understand. I was able to go in and install OpenStack, and unfortunately, a lot of the world right now is screaming and hollering OpenStack. But these guys really helped me not only to understand CloudStack, it's a similar problem, but also how their perspective and how they're doing it. And I think it was pretty awesome and helped me really understand a whole lot more. And a lot of this stuff that we talked about, I've added to this presentation since last week. So, but before we run out of this room and go off and change the world, we must remember the DevOps principles. And where do we get our DevOps principles? From Mr. Gene Kim. No. No, Gene is awesome, right? You have to have, every DevOps presentation has to either have the Phoenix project in it or some variant of it, which is DevOps Cookbook, which I have the opportunity to be part of. But one of the things we talk about is the 3 ways of DevOps. And so whether this is networking, whether we're selling shoes, whether we're basically doing system administration, we need to remember there's this concept of left to right flow. It's theory of constraints, it's bottleneck analysis, it's flow. Understanding flow, understanding global optimization. And what this means is we don't deep dive into a problem and fix it just because we think it's a problem. We have to step back and look at the global optima to understand. And the biggest mistake we can do, I've done this. I used to go into value stream mapping, which is a great tool. And I go into a company and you see this thing and like, oh my God, guys, we're going to be hero consultants because they're manually building this server every time and it takes them, 6 hours to build it. And all we have to do is chef it and it's done in a minute. And then you realize, oh my God, I'm not thinking about the global because I might, if you read Elliot Goldratt and you read the goal and you understand theory of constraints, fixing a local optimum without understanding global optimum, best case is going to do nothing. Worst case, it's going to destroy things. Second principle of DevOps from the Gene Kim Bible, which I kind of subscribe to, is the kind of amplify feedback loops. We're always trying to push things closer to source. There's this kind of notion in Toyota production system of the and-on cord. It was actually a cord during the line that anybody could pull to stop the line. And when it stopped, and it was anybody had the ability and control to do this, right? It's the break the build. We see this in continuous delivery, right? But again, we need to do that. And then last but not least, it's about Kaizen and Kata. So a lot of what we talk about in DevOps comes from Toyota Production Systems. And Kaizen and Kata, right? Kaizen is continuous improvement. So again, we need to apply this. So if you think I'm not full of crap and like, oh my God, I get my network guys, and again, people are doing it. Schumer Fields is doing it. Phil's doing it, right? There are other companies doing it. There's a lot that are not. But like, we need to think about not just changing and going in, okay, I can write a chef cookbook. No. Right? There's a lot more to it to make it work, because it doesn't work unless we follow some principles. And so Kaizen is thinking about continuous improvement. Kata is a form of movement. Mike Rother's Toyota Kata, insanely good book. Should read it. And it applies again, whether it's network, sysadmin, making shoes. So what are the opportunities? Abstraction. Network is code, right? I think there's the ABCs of DevOps from a technology standpoint. First we abstract, then we control, with source control, then we test, and then there's variations of test, right? So we have abstraction, source control. Once we have our abstractions, we store those things in Git, possibly, and then we need to kind of promote development, software development, open source, right? That's a big part of the networking game right now. Be a committer. And you don't have to be a coder to be a committer, right? There's a lot of people who tell you the story better than I can, right? You can update the documentation, you do things. Become part of the open source awesomeness that's happening in the network. And by the way, you don't have to be a network engineer because, by the way, in the early days of DevOps, us op guys were acting like developers. And once we got the attention of developers, and they started acting like ops guys. right? So it's the same thing over again. Unit testing, right? So what if the InfoSec guys did this? They have this, there's an open source project called Gauntlet, right? Where they run Cucumber for InfoSec changes that are based on infrastructure as code. Wait, what about Cucumber for, or Selenium for network configuration changes? Right, lint. Maybe, oh my God, you should never name a VLAN port this. Right, we have a range. It could never be like this. We catch one that gets through, we put it back, amplify feedback loops. Integration testing. What if I could emulate? What if I could actually push this code, check out some code from Jenkins, network abstraction code, make some changes, check it in, have an auto commit flag in there that actually would drive in some Cucumber Selenium testing for the basic lint and unit testing, go over to Jenkins, run some integration tests, maybe bring up a virtual environment. And by the way, this Brent guy is doing this with Open Daylight. They run Mininet, and they actually have some code that emulates port responses, and they're actually really starting to do this, right? And then go through that, all right, and that's cool, right? That's rocket science. But how about, like, if we get really mature, because this is something we do in software delivery now, is we start having behavior-driven tests. What if we could have feature flags, canary releases? Now I'm going insane. All right, get the guy off the stage. He's getting crazy, right? But, like, that's what we do. Read Jez Humble's book, Continuous Delivery. Read that book. It's a very thick book. But think about, like, could we do those things? I don't know. But could we do those things in the network domain? Could there be a day, and supposedly SDN is the promise of L4 and above. So the theory should be that I should be able to make some whiteboard changes, apply them into some source, hit a button, and see if, and then, in what we do in software delivery today, we kind of try it out in the New York metro area. Looks good, we're watching all the monitoring, nothing's going haywire, whatever the metric that should be going this way is going that way. Okay, let's make it all of, the East Coast. Okay, that looks good, let's make it all America. Okay, and this is how Etsy and Facebook and Twitter, that's how they run. They run feature flags. They run dark releases. So in a perfect SDN world, right, it should be, hey, this is my source requirements for the application, this is my network requirements, these are my storage requirements, and I should be able to treat that as a converged opportunity. Awesome. So what is the low-hanging fruit? I know I was supposed to end a little early. I thought I had 45 minutes, so I'll try to go really quick, really fast. Low-hanging fruit, right? So right now you'll see things like abstractions, VLAN creation, VLAN to port mapping, link aggregation. Puppet has a Netdev module. You Google Netdev out there, and they run on Arista and Juno OS right now. Chef has a lightweight resource provider for Netdev, which is pretty cool. It's funny. So Seth Chismar, I hired him at OpsCode. He's pretty awesome. And the reason I always say I love to say I hired certain people because they're like amazing. Matt Ray. I hired Matt Ray, by the way. I didn't hire Michael Ducey. No, almost did. But so I was talking to him early on. I'm like, hey, you got to show me what you guys are doing. I see all these announcements and help me understand. I want to see the code. I want to present it. So he sends me this cookbook, and how many people know what an LWRP is? Just a few, yeah. It's a really cool DSL for writing resources. It was a pretty clever idea to make the really hard stuff in Chef easy, right? So you want to create your own resource definition. And so there's two parts to an LWRP. There's an interface definition, which is resource, and there's the provider, which is the real code. So he sends this to me, and all I have in it is the resource definition. And I'm like, dude, this cookbook's not going to work. He's like, dude, it is going to work. And I'm like, dude, I know you're awesome, and I know, but it's not going to work. We went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It turns out what he did is, and I've never seen this in LWRP before, the vendor ships a cookbook that has the provider in it, and they ship just the interface edition. I'm like, holy crap, that's brilliant. Because now it's like, these are the definitions, and it's a much cleaner. And so, again, Jerry Schulman was pretty smart, right? Like, I'm not saying the Puppet stuff was bad, but when he went to Chef, he said, you know what, let me pay those guys to figure this out. And so theirs is like, hey, you're a vendor, you want to play in this game? Here's the interface definition. Provide a cookbook that maps this interface. Done. Pretty awesome. Higher level abstraction, there's some interesting stuff out there in open source protocol stuff. There's Quagga or Bird. Puppet has some classes, manifests for Quagga and Bird. The Chef has a cookbook I found for Quagga, right? So just, again, kind of raising what we could do. But how high can we go? Like, how many people have installed OpenStack? Not really. Okay, 1 and 2, right? So I'm going to get in so much trouble. Right? Those Rackspace people, they like me, and I've been good friends, so when I say stuff like this, they get really mad at me. But it's a freaking... Try go ahead and figuring out how OVSDB and the networking stuff works, the OVS plugin on OpenStack, and it is, like, insanely scary, right? And so I just took, and actually, to make the Rackspace people happy with me, I took a course. It was Rackspace has this OpenStack networking class, and it's freaking awesome. Absolutely an awesome class, because they really spend a lot of time on OVS, OVSDB. I mean, you basically work through troubleshoot. All the stuff you'd learn there pretty much would apply for CloudStack, as far as I can tell. I mean, they spend like a whole day on Open vSwitch and the OVS CTL commands, the vCTL commands. And anyway, but the point is, there's a lot of opportunity there for abstraction. I mean, the uglier it is, the more opportunity there is. I mean, OpenFlow is just an unbelievable opportunity. If you think about that flow table I showed earlier, right? The things that we might be able to do. One of the things about OpenFlow, which is interesting, is ultimately this flow table should be the controlling plane for load balancing, switching, NAT, really everything, right? So if you start thinking about how I could manage this thing with kind of abstractions, I might be able to do everything from one place, right? Open daylight, more tooling. And then there are a couple of interesting projects. I got to see this woman from Princeton. It's a frenetic project. They're basically trying to write what I would call an assembly language for OpenFlow coding. Because the thing is, I asked her during a presentation, like, well, are you reinventing the wheel? Why don't you just use Puppet and Chef? And she says, you don't understand, you dummy kid. And the point was, she was right. Like, there are so many complications to how OpenFlow needs to work, and between the data plane and the control plane. Like, they're figuring all that out as kind of a low level. They're using actually functional programming. They're actually using like complex event processing, like to build this nice plane on top of how you can code OpenFlow. There's some really good videos out there from the Princeton people that'll show you. And then there's this Mininet thing, which is a container-based emulation environment for basically for Open vSwitch, but it could be really anything. Like the Open Daylight guys use that for their testing, right? So you can build this, install, you could Vagrant up a friggin' network and then build vSwitches and start playing around, run Wireshark. I mean, really cool stuff, right? In fact, I got 6 weeks vacation. There's not 6 weeks left. I'm taking a month of December off, and that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be playing with and what I'm really going to be playing is something I actually found last night while I was just adding some more research to this. It's this PyFrenetic. And PyFrenetic is a Python abstraction from Frenetic, which is an abstraction for OpenFlow, which actually the first test thing that you build is a Mininet environment to go start playing with. Like, how cool is that, right? So that's what I'm going to be doing in December. And so, please call bullshit. If you think everything I said is a bunch of load of crap, let's go for it. I want to hear you. We have this acronym called CAMS, Culture, Automation, Measurement, and Sharing. I always say CAMS, not AMS. Never forget the culture. Always honor the flow. Deming calls it the aim. Goldratt calls it goal. Simon Sinek calls it the why. No matter what problem you're attacking, network, software, creating shoes. And one other thing is that every presentation I've seen from the network folks in the network conferences over the last 3 or 4 months, one of the things they say some in a presentation is, they say 2 things. 1, we need DevOps and networking, and 2, we need DevOps people's help. So let's figure out how to help them out. Thank you for listening to me. Enjoy the conference.